Some of you might be highly anticipating this video, and others of you may have never watched any video of mine before. Some of y'all might be very seasoned PVMers, others starting for the first time. But regardless of where you're at today in this Magic DPS guide, hopefully you'll be able to learn something. Now, the first thing people think about when talking about DPS or doing damage in this game, by the way, DPS stands for damage per second. In RuneScape, we focus more on DPM because it's a more useful metric, but I digress. The first thing people think about though is, what gear do I need to do damage? And this will get focused on almost to what I think is an unhealthy degree, because while gear and the effects it has is an important component of doing damage, it is not the end all be all. In RuneScape 3, we have abilities, and those are the actual source of damage. Now, I will have time codes down on the buffer bar, so if there are certain portions of the video you want to go and see, they will be there. But what I want to talk about first is abilities and what they are, the different types of them, all of that stuff. Abilities are broken into three main categories. There are basic, threshold, and ultimate abilities. In a general sense, your basic abilities give you adrenaline for decent damage, your thresholds give you more damage at the cost of adrenaline, and ultimates use a lot of adrenaline in order to give you better damage over time or for a gigantic hit. And being that we're on the topic of abilities, there is something here I want to bring up that is an important idea and kind of a general way for you to think about all of this. A lot of people will fall into the trap about worrying what precise ability to press next and start memorizing very precise rotations of, I'm going to press this ability, then this one, then this one, then this one. And if you focus on that and ask most high-level PVMers, you're probably going to get the frustrating answer of whatever sounds good at the time. There's a clash here of wanting perfect orderliness and getting essentially the answer of just do improv until it works. But if you learn nothing else from this video, it is better to think about doing damage, of getting certain key abilities out within a period of time and understanding which abilities are better to press than others, rather than focusing on a hyper specific type of rotation and what order to press the abilities in. Now, to add on to this, we're going to be talking about something that most people will ask for whenever they want to learn how to kill a boss, and what is the rotation you're using. And all a rotation is, in simple terms, is the abilities that you're pressing in a given amount of time. You might hear people talk about a phase 1 or phase 2 rotation. What's your rotation for this part of the fight? What does your average sunshine rotation look like? And like I was saying before, on focusing on getting key abilities out within a given period of time, the best way to think about and actually start improving your damage is by not worrying about every last button press in, say, a sunshine rotation, and just focusing on getting out the good abilities inside of the sunshine and moving on from there. And you might be thinking to yourself right now, well, what are the good buttons to press? Well, I'm glad you asked, theoretical viewer. For basic abilities, your strongest abilities are Greater Concentrated Blast, Corrupt Blast is very strong, Dragon Breath is a good press, Impact can be strong if you're using something like flanking, but it can also be a nice filler. Magma Tempest is also a strong basic. In short, most basics are pretty much fine to press on their own. It's not going to be the end of the world if you hit them. Rack is a little bit of a weak ability, so I wouldn't be pressing that one every time it comes off cooldown, but there are things you can do with Rack, like say a target is bindable or stunnable. Rack gets a nice damage buff, so if you like Ice Barrage something and press Rack, it does more damage than usual. But in a sense, Greater Concentrated Blast is going to be the bread and butter. It's probably going to be one of the abilities you're pressing the most often when using the magic combat style. For thresholds, we have things like Wild Magic, Asphyxiate, Smoke Tendrils, These are the solid always will press abilities. Deep Impact can be very useful in some situations, especially in ones where you have a flanking swap. It is a very powerful ability, but in general, it's not the best idea to be pressing Deep Impact 24/7. And for ultimates, Magic has 3 ultimates that you're really going to be concerned with, and one that comes up somewhat often. The 3 main ones being Omni Power, Tsunami, and Sunshine, or Greater Sunshine as it now is. Omni Power is a hyper strong ability with the Zuck Cape. Tsunami, when using the spell Incite Fear, has its adrenaline cut a lot, and it's very helpful because it gives you a adrenaline buff where every time you do a critical strike, which is just an RNG roll on every hit that you do where applicable, it will give you 8% adrenaline, so it's very useful. And Sunshine is a damage boost over time. Essentially, you press it and you have a 38-second window in order to have a 50% damage increase on all of your abilities except for bleeds. And this is where the idea of ability prioritization really comes alive, because you don't want to use something like, say, Smoke Tendrils outside of your Sunshine because its cooldown is longer than the duration that Sunshine is active. So if you use it just before you press the Sunshine button, then you're not going to have it for inside, where it's really going to get a lot of its benefit. Sunshine is going to be your main form of magic damage. There isn't really anything to be doing in between Sunshines. It's a 38-second duration. It has a 1-minute cooldown, and so in between you'll just kind of play with like maybe a couple of thresholds, but you're really optimizing for your Sunshine rotation inside of Magic to get the most out of the combat style. Now, the keen observers out there who have paid attention thus far might realize, wait, if we have an ultimate ability that is giving us adrenaline based off of crit chance, which is inherently random, how are we going to do a precise Sunshine rotation? And this is where the high-level PVMers will struggle to explain what they're doing, because to them it is just intertwined, it is natural, directly into what they're doing, and it is quite literally just natural for them to do a rotation and not think twice about it. But with adrenaline being inherently random, it's when you start to fall more so into guidelines or general button presses inside of a Sunshine rather than a precise Sunshine rotation, like I was mentioning before. So in a general sense, what I would aim for in a Sunshine, with assuming best in slot gear, I'll talk about gear further on in the video, but what I would aim for is an Omni Power, 2 Asphyxiates, a Wild Magic or 2, and a Smoke Tendrils, and then try to use G-Conk before some of those bigger abilities, because the benefit that G-Conk gives to the next ability, increasing the crit chance of the next ability by 5% with each hit, which essentially is just giving you extra damage on your next ability, or a greater chance to do damage on your next ability, so the average is higher. This is what people will refer to of G-Conking abilities, which is just pressing the G-Conk button before, say, an Omni Power, so that way the Omni Power gets a bit of extra chance to do more damage. You can use G-Conk before Omni Power, before Wild Magic, before Asphyxiate tendies. It's not gonna matter because it's already guaranteed to crit anyways. Although it is easy to go overboard and try and G-Conk everything that can take the benefit, and then you end up focusing on that rather than getting the right number of thresholds off inside of your Sunshine, thus making you do less damage because you're focusing on a tiny detail rather than the big picture, which you're kind of losing sight on. I fall into this trap quite a bit and have to remind myself to stop. Now, the one ultimate I didn't mention so far is Metamorph, and for 99% of use cases, you're not going to be using Metamorph. The only time I use Metamorph is for very burst damage situations, like maybe the chains at a Masket and the Chain Warden, the Gorilla or something like that, or at Carapac, where I can stack Metamorphosis with Sunshine and just crank out an ungodly amount of damage. But generally speaking, if you never press the Metamorph ability, then you're fine. Another threshold I didn't mention, because it is also pretty really niche to use is the detonate ability. It is useful for AoE, although it's kind of fallen to the wayside with how good Greater Chain is, which yes, Greater Chain is a good ability, but it is focused on AoE damage rather than single target damage. In most use cases anyone's going to be running into, they're not going to be worried about doing proper AoE damage. It's all going to be single target. But as a recap, when learning how to do damage, because at the top end your adrenaline is essentially random, it's never going to be 100% consistent because of critical strike chance giving you adrenaline based off tsunami. It is much better to focus on getting a general set of abilities like Omni Power or Innis Fix and Wild Magic, Tendies, things like that, focusing on getting a certain number of abilities out within a given period of time, rather than hyper fixating on exactly what ability you're going to be pressing next. I myself am a serial rack presser or slice spammer or piercing shot extraordinaire. I press those abilities way more than I should, and I still manage to do pretty good damage across the board. It's nothing to write home about, but I consider it good enough, and it's worked out for me so far. Now, this next section, I wanted to cover weapon special attacks and passives and armor set effects and armor passives and all of this. I wanted to put it into its own category, and this will eventually lead into the gear discussion, but I wanted to start here because with Magic there are two weapon specs that you really need to know about. The first one being the special attack of Fractured Staff of Armadyl. What this special attack does is give you a 30-second window after activation to essentially give you free damage for any time you crit. So say I press rack and it crits under the FSOA spec, it'll give out a second hit for free. The staff will cast it automatically. There's no input required. You might even see some little lightning animations on whatever you're attacking, and those are the FSOA hits going out. And this special attack is the bread and butter of what makes Magic really sing, and what also makes it a very crit heavy combat style where you're really trying to optimize as much as possible for your crit chance. It also has a passive effect that gives you extra critical strike damage. It ranges between 15 and 30%, and obviously that's nothing you can control. It's just a random damage buff to add a little bit of damage into your average. It's a slight little bump, but it is nice. The second weapon special attack you really need to know about is the one from the Roar of Awakening and the Ode to Deceit, although it is just the Roar of Awakening that has the special attack technically. And what this does is essentially uses a giant bleed on the target, and when you cast it you'll see 2 hits and then you will see a bleed go through. So if I just do it here, I will cast the special attack. You'll see 2 hits. One was the impact of the special attack itself, and the other was the starting of the bleed, which you see there, and it'll keep going for a while. Now, when you cast the special attack, there is a passive that was up there. I had my mouse hovering over it, and if you press the combust ability within that window, it gets a nice damage buff. Now, if you look here, I have Essence Corruption. These are stacks that are built from bleeds when equipping these weapons, and how this works is if we go here, it says at 1, 25, and 50 stacks, you get additional effects, and at 1, you get a 30% chance to reset a bleed instantly and have all of the damage apply at once. Now at 25 stacks, you effectively get some bonus damage applied, and at 50 plus stacks, you get a little bit of adrenaline over time when doing basics, so it helps you build adrenaline more. It's not really anything you have to focus on. The main thing that you want is to always at least have 1 stat going so your bleeds can reset, and the wand spec itself, because it's a bleed, technically can reset. And that's where you'll see the classic thing of just someone getting, you know, the statistical anomaly of like 6 or 7 wand specs in a row where they just keep spamming it and you just see all the damage popping up. That is what's happening. Also, when you're wearing both of with these weapons, you get a 30% damage increase to all bleeds or damage over time abilities. I call them bleeds because that's what we all called them back in the day. Now they're trying to separate between like bleeds, burns, damage over times, or dots for short. But essentially anything where you cast it and then you'll see a residual hit keep going, that's what we're talking about when talking about bleed effects or bleed abilities. Bleed abilities cannot crit, but most of them are pretty good damage, and with this 30% increase, Combust is a good ability to be pressing, and Corrupt Blast also is. The problem with this, and this is bleeds in general, not just a magic specific problem, is if you have a bleed going on a target and you're with a buddy and he presses that same ability, it overwrites yours and just applies his to the target. Hopefully that changes in the future, but I'm not going to hold my breath over it. But the special attacks and these two weapons are your bread and butter ticket to doing big time magic DPM. Now, on the topic of special attacks, but not something you're going to keep as a physical weapon, I have two EoFs here. One has a Gothic staff, the other has a Iban. These are your run-of-the-mill bog standard EoFs for magic. There aren't too many of them. Now, I understand some spreadsheet wizard or someone else is going to come in the comments probably and talk about ABS and try and revive it and make it good, but personally I'm not buying another. I had replaced it, so I'm not going to bother with it, and I personally don't think it's that good of damage overall. There might be some technicality where it is better in some weird instance on an average technicality, but for your average person trying to learn magic DPS, it's not that big of a deal. I would just go with the big Iban button for when you have a bunch of spare adrenaline. Gothic staff is nice because while it is a kind of weak ability for 25%, the effect of giving you additional accuracy is very nice. If you don't need the Gothic staff defense reduction essentially, or accuracy increase, you could use something like a Z staff to reduce a target's magic level. This is nice at places like Karapak or Glaykor. I think it works technically at a Masket, and that'll help effectively with damage reduction, but G-Staff and Iban are the two EoFs that I run pretty much anywhere, and I never differentiate from these two. Now, the eagle-eyed among you might have noticed I am wearing a Zealot's amulet, and I have the prayer book up, not the curses book. And that is for good reason. With magic being so dependent on critical strike chance, using something like Eclipse Soul as your overhead or your mainstay overhead is actually pretty beneficial because it is a 4% crit strike chance increase. Now, there are 3 checkboxes you have to satisfy before you go over to something like the prayer book with something like Zealots. The first checkbox being you can't be taking advantage of Split Soul, which magic has no access to Split Soul. That's only for ranged and necromancy, so you have that one already. Whatever you decide to go kill must maintain accuracy, so if you're doing something with curses and you have 100% accuracy, if it goes down to like 99 or 98, you're still probably fine, but if it takes a sudden dip in accuracy, it's probably better to just use curses or maybe bring something like a stat hammer, but that's more boss specific. I'm not going to get into that too much in this video. And the third box is you must be able to maintain survivability because Eclipse Soul isn't going to heal you that much. But if you can check all 3 of those boxes, this is the better damage setup by far. Now, say you don't want to use the Zealots and the single stat boosting prayers, you don't have to. It is still better damage just by default to have Divine Rage and Augury up with Eclipse Soul and just camping EoFs, because this setup gives you 13% magic damage increase if you go into the prayer window. I think if I go here and here, keep an EoF on, and I go here, yeah, magic strength is 13%. If you have the curses on, the tier 99 curse, it's only 12%. Magic accuracy here is 235. I believe on tier 99 it's 347 or 395. I can't remember I know it's over 300, but this is what I was talking about before, where you have to make sure you're maintaining accuracy on whatever you attack. But even this setup is more damage than the curses. And if I go on to Zealots here and I select my curse setup, which there's like 17 of, and I go here, it is plus 21% magic strength. It's even less accuracy, so this is very much like the drunken bar fight build of prayers, but when you land those haymakers, that boss is going to get deleted right quick. And long story short, anywhere I can get away with the normal prayer book, I am absolutely going to take this with magic, no questions asked. Now, I have been rambling for quite a bit so far, but I do believe all of that information is important to at least have a basic understanding of. You don't have to memorize everything there, but now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this video, and that is the actual rotations that I use. First off, I'm just going to give you a bog standard sunshine rotation, and this is just going to be there's not going to be anything fancy. I'm going to do a more advanced rotation after this one. Now, something I would recommend doing is coming over to these dummies before going to whatever boss you want to use said rotation on and getting some essence corruption stacks just so you have a chance of something refreshing. But that example sun would look something like this. So we'll go ahead and hit sunshine with an A pot. Go ahead and hit G-Conk into a D breath. I like to hit Magma Tempest before hitting Nami and swapping over to Exsanguinate. FSOA spec, maybe hit a G-Conk and go immediately into an Asphyx. Let it channel all the way through. Wild Magic. Omni Power. We go for my first Ibin. Got some decent adren there. We hit a G-Staff and then go for a Tendrils. Go ahead and hit another Ibin Staff into a G-Conk and another Asphyx. And Sunshine's going to run out here, but what I like to do is then just go into a Wild Magic and then just kind of play with damage from here. Maybe go for like Ice, Rack, and Ruin or something. Another G-Staff maybe. And then I would just kind of wait around until Sunshine came off cooldown and then go back into another Sunshine rotation. But I focused on getting 2 asphyxiates off per Sunshine. That is the big ticket right there. Getting an Omni Power inside of the buff from asphyxiate and trying to get 2 wild magics off. Having Tsunami activated before the FSOA spec. But now I want to showcase something a little bit more advanced, and this is what I do pretty much anytime I do a magic camp rotation at a boss. All right, so whenever I go into a boss instance and I am magic camping said boss instance, I'm not doing a hybrid setup or anything like that, just straight up magic camp. What I will do is I will get my bleed stacks per usual, but then I will come back over to this adrenaline crystal and stall a wand spec. Now, I do have an older video on the channel. Again, I'll try and put it up in a card somewhere, wherever that pops up on screen, explaining what ability stalling is, how it works, and the concepts behind it. But what this allows me to do is release the wand spec and then get an insight fear stack off the bat while starting a sunshine, because with stalling you already incur the global cooldown here, so you just release it with sunshine in whatever boss you happen to go to, and then all you need is a G-Conk and something like a D breath before you hit Tsunami, and that'll be 2, 3, and 4, and then 5 on your insight fear stacks, so that way you get the full adrenaline reduction off of Tsunami. You have the very powerful wand spec bleed already going, doing damage on the boss immediately, and it would look something like this. So let's say I got ready for a boss and then I go over here, get a couple of bleeds, and I'll just run away, install a wand spec. Now for purposes of this video, words are hard, I'm just going to run over here and then just target cycle release with smoke cloud into a sunshine. And then do the same thing as before. Maybe go for a smoke cloud there just to get that off. FSOA spec. I forgot to swap to Exsanguinate, but it is what it is. And then go ahead and go for the asphyxiate. Get a wild magic, see where our adren's at. Omni Power, something like an Ibin. We had G-Conk into attendees here because I'm only sitting around 60. Then another Ibin staff. We're going to equip the Zealots. G-Conk into another Ibin and go for the Asphyx. Sun's gonna run out, but it's still worthwhile to get the full Asphyx off. And then maybe finish it off with a wild magic. Now, for those who don't want to go watch a full in-depth video on ability stalling, totally get that. I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version here. In order to release a stalled ability, which all you do to stall an ability is just go outside the maximum attack range, which for this dummy is this tile with magic. So as you can see, if I'm outside of the cast distance, my character will run in. So if I run out here, press an ability, my character runs in, and then once I'm inside the attack range, I then cast it. So all I do when I want to stall a wand spec to go in, I get my bleed, and then I just press the ability, the weapon special attack there, and then go to the adren crystal, and then I'll dive up here because dive doesn't wipe your stalled ability, and then I will hit target cycle and smoke cloud, and that releases the wand spec. Now you see I didn't get a global cooldown there because I already incurred it when I pressed weapon spec running out of attack distance over to the adren crystal. So then I'm free to press sunshine and just go into my rotation there. I have the insight fear stack. Now the eagle-eyed among you might have noticed I got my insight fear stacks early on that last sunshine because it hadn't worn out from me getting the bleed on this dummy for the essence corruption stacks. In normal boss situations, its insight fear is going to run out by the time you get into the instance and you retype everything, you join, and then you're going to the boss, and then you get ready to start and you dive in. Also, you will keep a stall as long as you are in combat. If you drop combat, you drop the stall. Dive will not wipe a stalled ability, and you can also use Invoke Lord of Bones to just permanently keep yourself in combat, and this will also not wipe your stall. And I think it makes magic rotation quite a bit nicer. I can actually give a practical example here real quick. I'm just going to go ahead and just reattune my boss portal to Raksha. Go ahead and make sure our Calg is summoned, and I'm just going to do the same thing here. I'm going to make sure I'm overloaded. Go ahead and grab my bleed and hit the wand spec. Just stall it, go to the adren crystal, and then go off to the boss. This just happens to be Raksha, but any place you want to magic camp, you can do this at. Go ahead and start, then dive on in. And then just kind of go through the same thing here, and then just release with the sunshine. You get the wand spec off immediately with the sun, and you go into a damage rotation from there. And as you can see, I'm only on one stack that came from the wand spec. And even though I was relatively quickly getting into Raksha, you can be faster. I still did end up losing my insight fear stack, so I just wanted to give that as an example and give you a quick visual representation of what that actually looks like in quote unquote real world applications or practical applications. Now, something to keep in mind, I've been talking quite a bit here. I've given a lot of information, but something that is important I want to talk about real quick, or just mention real quick, is that this is a DPS guide. This isn't a discussion video. This isn't the place to be giving your giant law-worthy testimony about your thoughts on the mechanic, ability stalling, or any of the other things here. It's a DPS guide. If you want to talk about your opinions on stuff, I do stream on Twitch from time to time, so feel free to pop in there, or if I do a discussion video on something, you can leave it in those comments. But if you do have any questions about the information that I've given you, or you're confused about something, feel free to leave it in the comments below, and either I will or someone else will try and respond and help you out with what you may or may not be understanding. But I have info dumped enough on you guys. I think I'm just gonna call the video here.